Hello, my name is Kevin. Welcome to Conversations with Catholics, and I am thrilled today to be joined by fellow YouTuber and content creator, Drew the Catholic. Drew, what's up?
Hey, Kevin, how are you, man? Thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks so much for coming on. This conversation has been a while in the making, and I say that for a few reasons. So first, it's just we've been talking over Discord for probably like a year at this point, I think. And also, and I don't know if you know this, but I have had more than one person in my comments saying like, you got to have Drew on for an episode.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Oh, no.
Yep. So the fans have been begging for it, and you know, I'm a man.
Give the people what they want. Yeah.
Precisely. And today they wanted you, so that's where we're at today.
I have no idea why. I'm just a random dude on YouTube with no idea what he's doing. It might be in no small part because we pretty much look the same in terms of like glasses, man bun, beard.
Yep.
Your hair's a little darker. Mine's a little more like kind of like dark blonde. So we're the same, and the same person almost, but with like different views. It's really funny to me. It's just so funny that that's the case.
Yeah, I could easily see people confusing us. And in fact, I'm in the grocery store the other day. Somebody, Drew the Catholic? I said, no, sorry, I'm the other guy.
It's a conspiracy theory. We're just the same person. In fact, this is just an AI conversation happening, right?
Well, and we're doing this because everybody has been saying like, I haven't seen Drew and Kevin in the same room at the same time. Well, now you have. And hey, if it's AI, then they'll never know. So
right. That's funny, man.
So one of the reasons I was really excited about talking to you was because and so just like a little context for the audience, we're both part of Kyle Whittington's Discord server, and I have all these wacky ideas, right, of like what it means to be Catholic, that have nothing to do with the experience of the vast majority of Catholics, and that is definitely true for converts. And I feel like Kyle's Discord has like a pretty large group of converts for them. I mean, there's definitely cradle Catholics, of course, too. But I ask these questions, and I feel like I'm often met with like blank stares and just like Kevin, like that is not how like anybody thinks about things.
Oh, it's true. Yeah, it's really funny. I feel like it happens at least like once or twice a month, maybe more like once a week. And I'm like, oh, Kevin posted something, and then I'll see it and I'll be like, oh, that's so interesting. I don't think that at all. Yeah. So it is. I love it though. It's like the discussions we have in there are so good, and it's such a tight knit community. So
yeah, and I just realized that I never updated your name here. So because I'm very professional, I am updating your name on the fly. Yeah. There we go. Okay.
Drew, last name the Catholic.
Drew the Catholic. I thought that was your middle name.
It is, yeah.
Okay. I thought it was like an O apostrophe Connor type deal where like
right.
The Catholic might have been your last name, but no, I'm glad it's just your middle name.
I fully committed. Once I made this my YouTube name, I changed my legal name. So no.
Okay, so if you don't mind, I have I realized that I just kind of jumped into things, and most of my audience knows who you are, but not everyone would. So sure. Do you want to just maybe give like a 1 minute or a 2 minute like introduction, and tell us about who you are and what your channel is?
Yeah. So I'm Drew. Drew the Catholic is my YouTube channel. I've been going at it for about a year and a half, I would say. But in the real world, I do video production. So I own a small video production company on the western slope of Colorado. But before that, I was studying to be a pastor. I have a bachelor's in theology from Grand Canyon University, and became Anglican just through some connections with professors there, and then kept reading the church fathers and doing more research, and then became convinced I needed to become Catholic. So my wife and I picked up a wife along the way in that journey at some point. My wife and I came into the Catholic Church in, was it March of 2020? No, March of 2021. We got married in March of 2020. COVID canceled our wedding, so we had like a little virtual wedding, and then a year later, almost to the day, we were received into the church. So we've been Catholic for, 2.5 years officially.
That's awesome. Yeah. My first official question for you is, how trad are you? And by that, I mean, my audience is a lot of like extrads, like a lot of extrads, I guess.
Sure.
And so I'm sure that my audience would love to know, Drew, how do you really feel about Vatican II?
I am very Vatican II pilled, as you might say. In fact, literally minutes before coming on this stream, I was reading through Vatican II documents with Dom Damaso from the Logos Project. It's actually funny. It's a funny question because before I converted, this whole like Catholic liturgy wars dynamic was not on my mind at all. So I was just, innocently reading church documents. And when I was reading the church fathers, I was like, well, let's kind of go at this, from the opposite end with church documents. I read Vatican II first because it was the most recent and fell in love with it. Because to me, like reading the church fathers, reading the sources, and then reading Vatican II, it felt like they were like the same people in so many ways. So falling in love with the patristic sources and reading Vatican II, it made me really comfortable with becoming Catholic. And in a lot of ways drew me closer. I mean, just with my theological background, reading Lumen Gentium and De Verbum, for instance, I was like, this is so good. Like, this is so beautiful. It's well said. And yeah, so I guess you could say I'm like, I probably love Vatican II more than most people. I do think there's a whole weird maelstrom of things and misinterpretations and confusions about it. There's been a lot of concerns with its implementation that might be valid, but I think that for Catholics, obviously we have to accept that it's an ecumenical council and all that, but more than that, I think it's really it's the way forward in so many ways. And so then coming into the church, it makes me really sad that so many people don't know what it is or are suspicious of it or outright reject it. Because there's so much good in there. And really, like with a lot of the problems we're seeing in the church, I think that Vatican II offers the solution for that. And it's convenient in many ways that if that is the solution, then that's the thing we're being suspicious of is, how much like human beings is that? Like the very thing that would help us, we're suspicious of, So hopefully that briefly kind of gives you an idea of what I might be like on this issue.
No, it definitely does. And what's funny is that we kind of ignored Vatican II growing up. So you'll hear in a lot of trad circles, and I'm talking specifically here about like the SSPX kind of trads.
Sure.
They don't ignore Vatican II. They rail against it all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I didn't grow up SSPX. I grew up FSSP. So
Okay.
we weren't sedevacantists. We were in line with
Right.
Rome. Just it was kind of strained. And so we just kind of didn't talk about Vatican II. If we did, we might just grumble about it under our breaths, but we more or less just ignored it. So what's funny is that I didn't even really get into much Vatican II stuff until I was pretty much already not Catholic. And by that point, I was like, where is this boogeyman that I was told was
Right.
lurking within Vatican II? Like everything that we didn't talk about it much, but when we did, it was just kind of like don't bother. It's modernist nonsense. It's best just to ignore it. Foster a medieval sense of piety. Ignore Vatican II. That was kind of the attitude. And then when I actually read it, I was like, oh, like this is so much more like benign. Where's all the modernist,
Right.
evil that I was expecting to find in it?
Right.
So that was like, I wasn't even like fully, I guess, not Catholic when I started like digging into that stuff. And I was already experiencing like culture shock from I had expected to find something terrible and I didn't find something terrible, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, I think that's there are many such cases where people have strong opinions on Vatican II and they're getting those from some other source that they trust, that they're listening to, as we do as humans, right? We find people like us that we trust and we listen to them. But many times that those sources haven't even, coming from a background like yours, might not have even engaged with the council in its own words or on its own terms. And what I've seen is that a lot of people point to what they would call like the fruit of Vatican II, or they'll say the fruit of the spirit of Vatican II. And they'll say, well, that's because of the council, which I think it's well documented. And if you look into it, that the implementation, well, like Benedict XVI is famous for saying like, why didn't we implement this, guys? So there's a lot of stuff on the ground that happened that the council either didn't directly call for or didn't intend, that was, that was just done, or that wasn't done, or that was ignored. It's a whole host of things going on there. but yeah, that was discouraging to me, I guess, on the issue of Vatican II, is to see like, man, if you read the stuff, like there's some beautiful stuff there. There's some really important attitude shifts in there for the church that I think would be really good. Like, I mean, as the church teaches, we should be evangelizing. It teaches that, we should be fostering kinship with all people. And these are good, beautiful things that I think would be good to implement, good to embody. And it's just a tragedy. I think that there is such suspicion of it to the degree that people will have a strong attitude that haven't read it, right? And I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of things I disagree with, but I wouldn't want to have a really not in Vatican II, just in general in life. There's things I disagree with, right? With people who are on opposite sides of all sorts of issues, but I wouldn't want to have like a really strong public stance if I hadn't read like the primary text or the primary source they're coming from,
Yeah, and if I don't get used to this, everybody, but if I can say one word in defense of the kind of trad community that I grew up in, is that I think a lot of us were kind of born into the trad movement. So obviously I was, and everybody in my generation was, but to some extent, so were my parents. So my grandparents founded the church that I grew up in. They founded the like the church itself, but then there was a school in the basement of the church, like an FSSP school. And my parents both attended that school growing up. So they were born into it too.
Right. So it's like a fish in water. You kind of don't know what the surroundings are, what and that's pretty natural, right? Yeah, that's really natural. So
yeah, so it would be easy for me to like make fun of, like, I guess my fellow people in my generation, as well as the people in the generation above me. It would be easy for me to make fun of them, saying they never read Vatican II, and they still make fun of it. But then if I sit back and I think about it, it's kind of like, well, they were like me. They were born into it. I didn't read it either.
Right. Yeah. And that it is hard and uncomfortable to step beyond, like the water you were born in, so to speak. Right. Which I guess, like you and I probably have had that discomfort in different ways, in that, you've what word would you use for your journey? Like, would you say it's a deconversion, or I don't want to use the wrong word. What would you describe it as?
Yeah. So such a good question. And the only honest answer for you is, like, I feel like I use a different word every single day.
Okay. Yeah.
Deconversion is fine. I use the word deconstruction a lot, and I don't even particularly like the word, if I'm being honest.
Okay.
Because I don't know. I don't feel like anything got deconstructed for me. I only feel like I constructed like more layers on top, almost, if that makes sense. So, but you can refer to it as a deconversion or a deconstruction, and none of those words will all of those words work. There's no problem.
Yeah. Well, I think we've probably gone through something similar, in that, deconstructing for you and for me, like converting into Catholicism, like one necessary component on both of those journeys was reading things that earlier on we disagreed with, and being open to reading them and discovering them for what they were or what they weren't. And it is hard, I think, for someone who grows up in a certain fishbowl to realize, oh, this is water, and there might be something outside of this water worth looking into, and jumping from this fishbowl to another one or whatever. It's a really uncomfortable thing, because like we have so much security in what we believe, and it gives us grounding regardless of what system of thought it is. So to even look outside of that is, it's uncomfortable. So I can definitely see why, many people might not embark on that journey. But
yeah. And I always find it so funny. Like, whenever I talk to people so I have more in common with a lot of people who converted from Catholicism to Catholicism than I do with a lot of people who were born Catholic and then are just kind of like not practicing today. And like, I guess, why do I say that? I guess I say that because I think that a lot of people who were born Catholic and kind of just aren't practicing today, like, it was never entirely like a big deal to them. But I feel like a lot of the people who converted to Catholicism, a lot of the time, their religion was a big, whatever they were before, whether they were Mormon or whether they were some kind of Protestant or whether they were Muslim or whatever they were was a big deal to them. And so it's like, I find more in common between me and somebody else who converted to Catholicism if they left something that they were intensely devoted to, rather than somebody who left Catholicism like me, but they were never intensely devoted to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I can totally see the comparison. Like, yeah, because yeah, I mean that's what we see in just anecdotally in my experience on the ground in my parish. The non-practicing Catholics, I guess you could say, who we see on Christmas and Easter. It's not as though they've had some earth-shattering experience that's made them question everything and then they left because of some other direction they were moving intellectually, spiritually, otherwise. It's usually just the whole thing was never very the whole love affair was never very strong to begin with, I guess, to say it that way. Whereas, yeah, for you, it was strong, and then it's changed. And then for me, from Protestantism and the various Protestantisms, I guess I was involved with, it was really strong, um, and it changed in some ways as well. So yeah, I can see that because if you hold something intensely, to change it is way more is yeah, it's felt to a different degree than if you're just kind of like, I don't know. Grandma wanted me baptized, so I got baptized, and then I just stopped going. Not a big deal. So yeah, I can see that.
Exactly. Yeah. So that actually leads me to a question about just kind of your conversion.
Sure.
So when I guess converted, for lack of a better term, um, I wound up losing a lot of people in my life, like as in like people just didn't really want to, you know, associate with me anymore. Did you have the same thing? Just on the obvious, I'm not talking about Catholics, obviously. I'm talking about Protestants. Did
Sure.
anybody like not really want to associate with you after your like? Did you have any kind of hardship at all? I guess is a good question.
Yes, for sure. I will say it's interesting though because I've seen and I've helped other people through their journey and walking into the church, and I have some really close friends who came in after me, um, and they had a much harder time than I
Mm.
did in some ways. But there were definitely relationships that were dear to me, that like people that I considered friends and mentors, that essentially, yeah, I don't talk to anymore. And it's not that I'm not talking to them, like to be clear about the situation, and not just I'm not going to name them because I don't really want to slander them necessarily, but they they characterized the movement of my wife and I into Catholicism in some ways that definitely weren't accurate. And and yeah, like made other people that we weren't super close with, but made other people not really want to be involved with us or really afraid of us, which is
Yes.
like I'm just a cushiony dude. Like I'm just like a teddy bear. I'm not gonna hurt anybody. I'm not out there to brainwash you or manipulate you. I don't even think I'm like particularly convincing, to be honest. But you know, I think, and I'll say this carefully. I guess there was a situation that I was made aware of by someone else in which someone we were close with basically characterized me as someone that other people from our community shouldn't hang out with because I basically like brainwash people and make them think that this evil, idolatrous religion is somehow true when there's no evidence for it, whereas like all I did, if I can be accused of anything, is like I thought I followed the evidence and was enamored with it, and like when you're enamored with something you can't help but talk about it, and that's just like pretty natural. And then there's a couple other people in my life that saw that, and it kind of got them started on the same journey. And then to their credit, they weren't just taking what I said and running with it and also becoming Catholic. Oh, because Drew said, they went on their own journey, they went on their own investigation, and also chose the same path. But yeah, we had some people characterize it that way, that like I was just abrasive and manipulative. And I'm like, oh, it kind of makes you think. It's like weird. It almost like gaslights you in a weird way. Like you hear something like that, and you're like, am I that way? Like, was I doing that? Like, did I just like totally like brainwash my wife into becoming Catholic? And I even asked her, and she's like, oh no, I mean, it was all, we read it together. Like we looked into it, and um, yeah. So that did happen. Um, I was surprised at how it didn't happen to the degree I thought it would, though. Like I had a lot of, having a theology degree from a Protestant background, I had a lot of professors who obviously didn't make the same decision and are still in the same spot they were when I was involved in their communities, or being mentored by them or whatever, but they were okay with it. Or at the very least, if they weren't okay with it, they also weren't willing to I guess chastise me or like slander my name because of it. So I had a lot of really good supportive people as well. um yeah, so I had sort of a mixed bag,
Did
so it's
did anybody
interesting.
use the word like betray? Like did anyone tell you that you were betraying like your community or anything like that?
um Okay, so yeah, not when I had actually converted, but my story is interesting, and I think you've seen it in that years before my conversion, I was involved in a church community, and I was doing this internship program with the hope of kind of pastoring there eventually. Even though I had a theology degree, the way they kind of did it was they had what they called a discipleship training school that you had to go through to serve in like a formal ministry role of any kind. And so even if you had theological education and experience, didn't matter. You had to kind of go through their thing. And I was going through that, and we were doing these programs on. We did the presentations on revival because it was a more charismatic church, so they're really focused on like revival, you know. And one of the people on the list he could choose from was Francis of Assisi. And, you know, me reading church history at the time, kind of starting to move this way, but like being very hesitant about that, you know, ultimately where I ended up. I still wasn't very Catholic at the time, but I was just enamored with the history and the beauty. And by no means was I fully on board with the dogmas of Catholicism yet, but I was just kind of, you know, dipping my toes into it. So I picked Francis, and I was very historically accurate. Like, this is a Catholic dude. I mean, you know, even the most non-religious person doing a presentation on St. Francis is going to be like, yeah, he was a Catholic, you know, because he was. And I did a presentation that was faithful to the historical evidence, which, you know, and to some of the, you know, the more mystical aspects of it, of like some of his encounters and his visions and some of that stuff. And as soon as I ended the presentation, everyone's hands are shooting up asking me about Catholic dogmas, and I start defending those. And I'm like, I'm not even Catholic. Why are you guys, you know? But apparently I learned later I defended the intercession of the saints to such a degree that one of the people went home and was like, are we supposed to do that? So it was just a weird experience. But that interaction is probably the most hostile interaction about Catholicism I've ever had to date, because the leader basically took me into the green room behind the stage for the church at one point, after our sessions for the program, and like berated me for probably an hour, like yelling at me very loudly, very red in the face about, yeah, basically that. Not, he didn't use the word like you're betraying us, but he basically said like you're being led astray and confused, and like, you know, you're teaching damnable things. So that was probably the most colored reaction I had, and I wasn't even Catholic yet. So, so that you could see when I actually made the decision, I was expecting like World War III to break out.
Yeah.
And there were some instances, but for the most part, people were chill. There was just a couple, like I had mentioned earlier, there were a couple people that were hostile, which is, yeah. I just wish there was more curiosity. I think that was what I was longing for. Is like, talk to me about why. Like, if you think I'm wrong, let's chat about it. You know?
Yes.
So,
yes. One quick thought about St. Francis of Assisi is that St. Francis of Assisi was like in the 12th century, right? 12th or 13th?
Yeah, 1200s, yeah.
13th
So
century.
11th, or 13th, yeah.
Protestantism didn't exist yet. How can
Yep.
you be mad about, like, as a
Right.
Protestant, how can you be mad about that? Like, there hadn't been any number of theses nailed on any walls or any doors yet.
Right.
How can you be mad about? Anyway, that aside, you saw me pointing at the camera when you said that you just wished that there was more curiosity.
Mhm.
I 100% agree. I've gotten myself into a little bit of hot water every now and then when I use this term, and it's admittedly like it's not a flattering term, and I'm honestly trying to think of a better word for it, like even to this day. But sometimes I refer to like the traditionalist movement within the Catholic Church as being anti-intellectual. And what I mean by that is there is just such a culture of just, no, this is who we are. We do not, this is who you are. You were born into this, you will die into this, and don't question it. Kind of. And there's definitely, like, if somebody isn't trad anymore, it's a betrayal, right? It's not just it's not just like, oh wow, good for them. You know, they thought about it, they came to a different conclusion, and so now they are even just a Novus Ordo Catholic. You know,
Right.
And the lack of curiosity really upsets me. And Brother Andrew says, I'm always in hot water. Thanks, Brother Andrew. But yeah, I want to echo that. I wish that more people didn't jump to conclusions when they learned about
Right.
me, and I wish that more people just were like, oh wow, like that's interesting. Like why did you come to that conclusion? You know?
Right. I think it's just fear, right? I think, and this is natural, right? You know, to sympathize. Like as humans, we're afraid of things we don't understand, and the easy response and the response that is common, I think, to many people. I don't want to generalize and say like this is what everybody does, but many people choose this path. Is like you're being confronted with something that would make you challenge the way that you do things, and it's easier to just say, well, that person must be wrong from the get go and then not have to deal with it than to actually go, let's look into that, you know? Um, or even just to be open to hearing that person's experience. And I mean, I think people have a tough time with the gray area of life in that, like, there's, you know, I mean, even though I'm like a confessional Catholic, I totally get that there's people who are moving all sorts of directions religiously. And I'd have my theories on why, but I'm certainly not going to place bets on why without hearing them out first, right? You know, and I think there's a lot to be learned from like the journeys people make, you know, in areas and in directions maybe opposite of where I've landed, and ultimately, I mean, like for me, I like listening to other movements and other directions and other, you know, decisions people have made, because if there's any way in which it could have been, you know, like something I did that made someone feel ostracized, it's like, well, I don't want to be that way, right? I think that avoidance of curiosity in an attempt to kind of keep everything tight and keep everything secure kind of shoots us in the foot. And I say us, you know, kind of as Catholics, but also just as people, like
Yeah,
in any
just as
community,
humans.
in any way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Um, Rosemary in the chat says, so Rosemary was born regular old Roman Catholic, Novus Ordo, and she said that when she did the canonical change to the Byzantine Rite, her dad spoke about being Roman Rite, and he was uncomfortable with Rosemary not staying Roman Rite instead of Byzantine, even though she was still Catholic. So it's just kind of
oh
like,
man.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
levels of tribalism that kind of just don't make a whole lot
Right.
of sense when you actually think about it for a moment. But when you're born into it, like you said earlier, you don't see the water that you're swimming in.
Yeah, well, see, like even to take it away from something as, you know, important as like religious convictions, like Team Xbox or PlayStation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everyone remembers the console wars that are ever ongoing. Like people just do that. Like we like to be with people similar to us, and then we like to justify why we're in that space of what, even if it's about something like Xbox or PS5 or whatever it is. Um, it's harder to accommodate a disagreement than and still be disagreeing and in some sort of like communion or friendship. You know, the word communion might be strong, but friendship or walk with somebody where you have space for them in your life. It's harder to do that and disagree, but not use the disagreement as a form of alienation, you know.
And
Yeah.
sure, it's harder. And it's harder it's hardest when you've never done it before. But then
Yeah.
I don't know
Right.
about you, but I find that it gets easier and easier the more you do it. You know what I mean? Like the more that you hang
Totally.
out with people who aren't the exact same as you, the more that you realize that we're all people, right? Like we're all just
Mhm.
kind of muddling through this life. Like most of us are just
Mhm.
trying to do our best, you know? So I think that like hanging out with doing what you and I are doing right now, if I, you know, pat myself on the back, but doing what we're doing right now, I think is really important. And I think
Right.
that we would have fewer console wars if people, you know, did this
Right.
more often. Um,
Right. Yeah. And I think listening, you know, this is funny, like to Pope pill everybody, I guess. This is why I kind of some of the things that Pope Francis does with when he talks about listening. Obviously there's a whole host of like can of worms that just even saying that could open up for me, and I'm gonna be crucified for this later. But there's something really beautiful and pastoral about just that call of like, let's listen, let's be synodal, so to speak, right? To really, if someone is in a different place than you, to actually just slow down and hear them all the way out and clarify for understanding. Because then for a couple of reasons, one, like if you really do disagree and it's a thing where you have to overcome that disagreement, like say it's, you know, like your marriage and you're like on opposite sides of an issue, and okay, we have to come to some sort of compromise for the sake of our sanity. You can't get to the core of that issue without listening well. And then at the same time, if it's a type of disagreement where it might remain and you just have to live in that tension, same thing, clarifying down, understanding why will help you live in that tension, I think, So the idea of just like shutting out and ignoring it ultimately isn't going to be as productive in life and in just human fraternity. But yeah, listening, like if you just listen to people, even if you don't agree with the decision they've made, often you can see why they got there and appreciate that and be sympathetic to it and learn to walk with them still, learn to be around them still. And there might be some boundaries, like there might, like I'm thinking of like if it's in a family or something and like every conversation is like, oh, you became Catholic and we're Protestant and disowning you. Well, if they listen and understand, they might be able to appreciate why and still love you, still be family, and then be able to like be around you and know maybe we don't bring up sensitive theological subjects every time we talk. But does that make sense? I'm kind of
Yeah.
rambling now
No,
on the point of
absolutely.
listening, but
No, absolutely. And if I can try my hand at pope pilling some people too, it's here's what I have to say about the issue. So I am somebody who has been in circles full of the kinds of Catholics who are constantly decrying synodality at all, right? Like they think that the whole process of synodality is just like a bad process, pretty much. You know the kinds
Sure.
of Catholics I'm talking about. I've been in those circles. I'm also no longer a Catholic, so I'm around a lot of people who just aren't Catholic, or even just people who are nominally Catholic, and the decrying of the process of synodality to me just screams, I am out of touch. Like that's what it screams to me. The people who are complaining about the Pope thinking that the Vatican should like listen more, like that, those people represent such a small minority of like all humans on earth. So if you actually want to evangelize, wouldn't you want to listen to people? Like I feel like listening is part of evangelization, right?
It would be strategically important,
Right.
at the very least.
Yeah, so even just from like a pragmatic standpoint, I think that Pope Francis is spot on with all that stuff. I've got a question for you if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
While I have you here, I want to milk you for all you're worth.
That's not that much. So,
I have said in my videos, I've praised kind of like the Protestant spirit in a way. And I think when I say this, I only ever mean it as like a good thing for Protestants. But I feel like sometimes Catholics hear this and they're like, well, Kevin, why don't you praise Catholics in the same way? So I'm going to kind of say what I think about Protestantism, and I want to hear your thoughts as someone who has been both Protestant and Catholic. So I've gone on record as saying that one of my favorite things about the Protestant tradition is the freedom of inquiry within Protestantism that, at least according to me, isn't quite available to Catholics. What I mean is that Catholicism has built-in safety rails that Protestantism kind of just doesn't have. And what do I mean by safety rails? I mean something like Catholics are free to be skeptical about a lot of things. Like, let's just kind of take the topic of Mary, for instance. Catholics are free to be skeptical about La Salette and Fatima and Lourdes, but then there is this safety guard with, let's just pick one, perpetual virginity.
Right.
Protestants have all of those safeguards, even perpetual virginity, right? Like a Protestant is allowed to question that.
Right.
And I view that as a virtue, but I think that sometimes Catholics say to me, like, I don't think that's a virtue, Kevin. Like, I think that the having the guardrail there is a virtue. So as someone who's been both, I'm keen to get your thoughts on there. Like, do you view the kind of the more radical freedom that Protestants might have as a virtue, or do you think that the guardrails are more of a virtue?
Yeah, I think I'm smiling as you're saying this, because I was thinking of, like, as a Protestant, what would I have thought about this? I probably would have heard you say that as a Protestant and disagreed with you that I would have been like, no, there are definitely guardrails, man.
Okay.
I think from the Protestant perspective, and at least how I lived it out, we also thought there were guardrails, but I think you're correct in that they're actually, at least in the de facto reality of it, aren't, because there is many disagreements on those minute issues, as there are agreements in various. There's a multitude of Protestantisms, right? The umbrella of Protestantism, really what it shares in common is their attitude towards the Catholic Church, which is that they're Protestant of it. And from there, the disagreements can be endless between them. So I think de facto, the reality you're describing is real, but I don't know that as a Protestant I would have accepted that as the reality, that there weren't guardrails, or that there wasn't some final, I guess, boundary. And a lot of times they'll say like mere Christianity, and
Yeah.
but then the trouble is, as every Catholic apologist points out, the mere Christianity of one group is different than the mere Christianity of a different group, and so then it just kind of devolves or evolves depending on your perspective, I guess, from there. So I think that's my reaction. Just my first reaction is like, as a Protestant, I would have disagreed with the claim, but de facto it is true. Like, I would have tried to argue that no, we might disagree about what I called at the as a Protestant second order issues of dogma. And even in Catholicism, like you mentioned, there are second order and third order issues of dogma, but Catholicism has an intellectual and hierarchical structure with which to kind of enforce that or necessitate it, right? And Protestantism has no such structure. The closest thing I think would be sola scriptura, right? But even then you come into the problem that on the ground we might say, yeah, we can agree on the principle that everything in Scripture is infallible for matters of faith and morals, but we can't agree what's clear in Scripture. So it's like de facto doesn't work, I think that's an interesting question though, because like as a Protestant, I would have tried to disagree so hard and I would have tried to say, if it was what you're saying is a good thing, I would have said that that's a bad thing if that's the reality. And in reality, I think that's a large reason I became Catholic, right? Is because it's tough though. So I want to navigate this a little bit carefully. I think that there's, I think that there is virtue in letting someone explore and question their beliefs safely. And what I mean by safely is like allowing that question, and I guess I studied theology, so I can't help but view it this way through the lens of Jewish tradition. A lot of the rabbis taught this way. This is how they would teach people. They wouldn't teach them, in what year did Columbus sail the ocean blue? And then you learn the response, 1492. They would teach them to ask the right questions rather than look for getting them to repeat the right answers, because then they knew that you were building your thought process properly upon the foundation. And so I think that there is virtue in a form of what you're praising on that spectrum, in that, like for me, like thinking of myself as a father teaching my children, and thinking of myself as someone who, might be catechizing people in my parish, and or even to take it out of the religious spectrum, like if I'm teaching someone how to do video production, that's a subcontractor, an employee for my business, I would rather see them asking the right type of question to lead them to the right answer, or to lead them to a functional answer, or to lead them to the skill of operating a camera the right way, than just tell them how to do it. And I think that grants someone more human dignity. It grants them agency, and that's always a good thing. Obviously, I would say, like as a Catholic, I would say that there is truth, there is a correct answer, and that human flourishing comes out of living in accordance with what reality is. And there's different degrees to which we can ascertain that, and we have finiteness, and that gets all convoluted and complicated and whole can of worms. But I think that to make this black and white of like, no, just hand them the answers, question and answer format, and we need to copy paste everybody to be the same. Yeah, people are going to rebel, man. They're going to be like, wait, I want to, I have a question about that. So I don't know. That's kind of my gut level response. Do you have any thoughts to that?
Yeah. So I do. So, well, I guess first of all, people are going to rebel. I mean, so I was raised in like, the fundamentalist Protestant version of Catholicism, right? So I mean, like, that I guess I did rebel in that sense. But something else here too that I want to highlight. So Anton is Catholic.
Okay.
And Anton says, so Catholics are free to inquire, but must ultimately submit intellect and will. So the goal, and if I may paraphrase, the goal within Catholicism is to understand the ins and outs of the system more fully.
Right.
And if I may, and like Anton, don't let me put words in your mouth. So please, if I'm putting words in your mouth here, just tell me. But while the goal within Catholicism, like the goals might just be different, right? So the goals within Catholicism might be to understand the system inside and out, while the goal within Protestantism might be a little bit more radical in the sense where the goal is to almost step outside of the system altogether. And I guess depending on your perspective, maybe stepping outside the system is a good thing. Maybe it's a virtue. Maybe it's a vice. Maybe it's pride. Thomas Palega, I've had Thomas on the channel. Thomas is another Catholic. And so Thomas says the guardrails of Catholicism is its greatest strength. But today we've gotten rid of the guardrails and in practice made every Catholic teaching heretical, which isn't a virtue, but a prison. Ooh, interesting. Yeah. And I think Thomas here, and again, Thomas, don't let me put words in your mouth, but I imagine that Thomas is saying something to the effect of, too many Catholics are treating too many things on which you do have the freedom to question as if it were something that you are not allowed to question.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Drew?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to just blanket evaluate the entire Catholic population of the world. I could see that though. I mean, anecdotally, I think that's just generally the human experience in 2023, right? Like as the world gets a little more cray and we're more polarized, and that's just like, I guess the talking point of everyone now is like, oh, we're so polarized, we're so tribal, yada yada yada, which I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, it's affecting every community in a lot of ways, and I think it's true in the Catholic community as well. And like just to, I guess I always like to think about the thing I'm not thinking about. So the thing in that conversation is what's doing that. Well, maybe it's the fact that we've introduced massive world-changing technologies in the span of 150 years that there's no way our psychology has caught up with yet. Like we don't even know how to process the iPhone, and we're already coming out with virtual reality and AI and all sorts of crazy stuff. So like we've had this massive seismic shift in technology that's fundamentally changed everything, and not just once, but like 100 times in the last 100 years. So we're all reeling for the new normal, and there is no new normal because it keeps going and advancing. And so everyone's kind of, I think, perpetually anxious as a result. And I'm not saying this is the only factor. I mean, this is maybe one factor among many. And so I think what he's saying, yeah, is probably true in a sense that like, it's not just Catholicism as it presents itself as what would be dogmatic is what you have to hold to, but people are digging down into their subgroups, like if you're like a trad, you have to be this type of Catholic that's a trad. If you're, just to use like internet terms, I guess, if you identify as a libcath, which I don't know if anyone would say they are, but if you're in like a more progressive camp, then you would say everyone has to be like me.
Thomas might. Thomas might. I don't. And Thomas, let me know if you do or do not. But you might identify as a libcath. Well, and sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but
no, you're good.
Thomas might. He definitely is. He's a Catholic who holds more liberal positions on certain issues. Now, whether or not that qualifies you as a libcath or something, that's not really my place to tell you whether or not that makes you a libcath.
Because usually that's used as an insult, but that's why I hesitate to say it. But yeah, like I think people generally are just digging their heels in where they're at. And again, I'm not trying to diagnose the entire human population. We're seeing anecdotally, I think, more of that. So I wouldn't be surprised if his statement is, a good description of it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And also, Daniel chimes in and says progressive Catholic. So
okay,
that's I like
that's
that
probably
label.
the better label. Yeah, progressive within the Catholic tradition or something.
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of kind of digging your heels in where you might not need to, I have an interesting question for you. Again, I'm trying to milk you for all that I can while I've got you. Growing up the way that I did, Marian apparitions were kind of not optional. Now, obviously, well, I say obviously. So, Marian apparitions within the Catholic Church are optional. The official position of the Catholic Church is that nobody must believe that Fatima is an authentic Marian apparition, that Guadalupe, that La Salette, none of these must be authentic apparitions in order for you to go to heaven. You can be a perfectly good Catholic. You could be a Catholic in perfectly good standing, and you can think that Fatima is a load of baloney if you think that way. That is the official teaching.
Right.
That is not how it is when you grow up the way that I do.
Sure.
And so I have a question for you. My sense is that Protestant converts often, and I don't know if often is the right word, but I know that at least some Protestant converts never dive into the whole Marian apparition thing as intensely as the way that my community did. And I think that some of that might be like just Protestants by and large aren't as they're not as cool with venerating Mary, like at all, kind of, some of them.
Right. Yeah.
So when Protestants convert to Catholicism, some of them just never get super on, they love Mary, of course. But they don't venerate Mary to the same degree that trad Catholics do. So
Right.
I guess my question for you is, do you think that, and obviously you can't speak for all of them, but do you think that it's do you think that my observation here about Protestant converts to Catholicism is correct? And then for you personally, do you have any kind of particular devotion to any certain Marian apparition? And I guess just what's your thoughts about Marian apparitions in general?
Yeah, I think this is interesting. I remember when you sent me the questions, this one was interesting to me. I think a Protestant reaction to it would largely depend on like the branch of Protestantism you're coming from, right? For me, I kind of dipped my toes in a lot of different Protestant flavors before becoming Catholic anyway. So I probably have a unique reaction in that I spend a lot of time being formed in what I would say, like I would call more like a non-denominational kind of Baptist leaning Calvinist place first, like very much about exegetical scripture, and they taught as a matter of faith that miracles, basically like spiritual, like the works of the Holy Spirit mentioned in 1 Corinthians 12 don't happen anymore, and ended with the death of the apostle. And I went all the way from that kind of extreme, like John MacArthur would be representative of that view,
And
all
that
the way
view
to
would preclude all Marian apparitions, like because the works of the Spirit
they
are
would
done.
say that. Yeah.
Interesting. See, I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like John MacArthur style Protestantism, they actually have a conference called Strange Fire, and this is so funny to me now. The whole conference is basically about bashing Pentecostalism as demonic because they think that can't happen. So kind of the same thing we were talking about earlier, like my worldview precludes that from happening, and I see it happening, therefore it can't happen. Therefore a whole conference dedicated to just, kind of pooping on those communities.
Yes.
I came from there first, and then before I became Catholic, I was in a very charismatic church, like speaking in tongues, seeking miracles actively.
Not Catholic charismatic though. This
not
was
Catholic charismatic.
Okay.
Yeah, Protestant. Yeah, and
Okay.
this was the one that, but very anti-Catholic. So that's what's interesting, right? Because they're like, you'd think they'd be like, oh, miracle every Sunday, let's go.
But
Yeah,
not so.
No, yeah. And their eschatology played into that. They were convinced that the Pope had to be the Antichrist.
Ooh.
So it's like a whole weird thing. But all that to say, my Protestant friends who are from like the more John MacArthur type community, just to kind of put language to it that I guess can make it palatable, or like that I can pinpoint, they'd probably be very skeptical of apparitions for the reason that they would say anything with Mary is idolatry, and then second, that miracles can't happen. But then the more charismatic communities, if they became Catholic, they would be like, yeah, dude, I'm all about it. So it really kind of depends on which gamut you come from. For me personally, in terms of converting, they were only at the periphery of it. Like I wouldn't say I was particularly involved in or reading a lot about any of those. Eucharistic miracles, maybe more so, just because that was interesting and kind of weird. And I liked some of those, and then that's kind of intersects with like, oh, there might be like hard evidence here, but I don't think any of them were like the key for me. The key that made me Catholic was really just my understanding of Scripture being informed with historical evidences about what first century Jews believed, and then that paired with the church fathers. So like for me, it wasn't a huge role. I think once I converted, I started researching them a lot more. I think I do have a favorite. I think it's Our Lady of Guadalupe. And yeah, it's a cool story. It's a beautiful story in some ways, and for me, like we have a giant image of Our Lady of Guadalupe in our church, and it's probably so. To speak from this angle, we have a large Hispanic community in our parish that has Spanish Mass, and then we have a large Anglo community that has English Mass, and those never interact. But on Guadalupe feast day and around Guadalupe events, and just around the veneration of Guadalupe, our whole church is actually like one parish.
That's cool.
So the unitive factor of that is really cool. And then just the American Catholic experience, the fact that we have like a distinctly American apparition that's very large in the church, I think is really unique and is good for our Catholic identity in America. I definitely like, I don't know. I like, yeah, if someone just like outright rejected Fatima, I'd be like, okay. I mean, I think there's something there, but you know, like as you said, the church teaches you're free to do that and you're still a good Catholic. I wouldn't really get up in arms in that. And in the same way, there's some people I think that get so concerned with them that becomes, well, I mean, it becomes what the church says it precisely isn't. It becomes a source of dogma. And I think that can get like, that concerns me a little bit in that, like, I mean, I want to say, like, I think there's good evidence for some of these, and I hold to them as maybe, you know, being worthy of belief that they were supernatural, like the church would say. But I'm always trying to be a faithful son of the church. So I don't know that I wouldn't place them as the focal point through which I'm viewing everything else that's going on in the church. Like I would use them to maybe inform in an auxiliary sense. Okay, this might give us a sense of the sign of the times, which is kind of language the church uses. It might give us a sense of something that is happening in God's heart, something that's happening in prayer. But I'm not going to make this the center of my Catholicism. Because I think if we do that with stuff that's truly supposed to be secondary in the Catholic framework, then we can kind of get out of ordered, or like properly stated, like disordered, right? You know, that's a loaded term in a lot of ways, but like you're kind of, you know, like the wheel on a bike, it's out of true. If it's bent a little bit way, it's going to start veering off a little bit. So I think that can happen with apparitions. I think it does happen. Like people will use an apparition to say, well, because this apparition says this, it must be this theory of fulfillment that this particular YouTuber has or this particular blogger has. Therefore, this guy isn't really a bishop, or this pope isn't really a pope, or this president of this country is going to be the Antichrist, or whatever it is, you know, like, I also am just kind of like, I don't know what's going to happen in the world tomorrow, but you know, from my perspective, Jesus is Lord. He's got it all in control. My expectation is to do what I need to do in my community, take care of my family, and do what I can to influence the world in a better way. Ultimately, okay, yeah, say that next president or whoever is the Antichrist. Okay, like I can't do anything about it. Yeah. It'd be pretty dope to live through that episode of human history, I guess, but like I don't know. Which is probably a very bland answer in some ways. It's too nuanced, maybe, but that's kind of my take on that, I guess.
No, yeah, I like it. I'll add a few things, and I'll also just say that Dom found us, so now we have to behave. But but what you said about it wouldn't be right. It would be disordered to kind of put Marian apparitions on such a level that they kind of became like dogma. That absolutely does happen, at least within some pockets of the church. And if I may say so, it happens within the trad movement. Sure. Particularly, so Fatima, but also things like La Salette. And I think there's a little bit of like wish fulfillment going on, particularly with La Salette, because La Salette talks about like wicked popes and ushering in the Antichrist and the end times and stuff like that. And I know that for some trads who are just very pessimistic about, I guess, the current pontiff, and also just kind of like all pontiffs since Vatican II, since Paul VI, right?
Catholic, right? Yeah.
It's wish fulfillment, right? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna point to La Salette. I'm gonna make my whole personality based on La Salette, because La Salette lets me. It gives me like, oh, look, it's not just me saying, oh, bad pope. Our
Right.
Lady said bad pope. Therefore, it's like now I have license to critique and criticize the pope.
Right.
And so, you know, that definitely went on in the kind of culture that I grew up in.
Right. Yeah,
So
I mean I could see that because like I mean again it kind of goes back to that like especially if you live in a community that in some ways is radically opposed to kind of what's going on in the world at large, you have to find a way for that narrative to be sensible. And then even if the you know the niche community within the church that you're in kind of feels suppressed, same sort of I guess logical narrativization has to happen. Like we as human creatures, we like to make sense of our surroundings, what's happening. I could see it that's like a natural thing to do. I'm not
ooh, you might have hit.
yeah.
Oh, I just lost you for a brief second there. I don't know if
Oh,
like.
am I back? Can
Yeah,
you hear
you're
me
back.
now?
You're back.
Okay. Oh, you know what it is? I think my iPad just died, so that could have made my
Oh, okay.
internet blip or something. I'm not using the iPad to stream, but I don't know. That could have been it. Anyways, yeah, I was just saying, like, I can see how that happens for sure, and it's one of those things where again, you could have this source that just is radical confirmation bias, or you could have this difficult reality in front of you that you have to do some work to kind of unpack and understand how you fit within it. It's harder to choose the latter, you know. And that's just a general statement, I guess, about all of this stuff, you know. Because I don't know too much about the Lost Silette apparition at all, so I can't speak to it specifically. But I could see how that, just like my anecdotal experience within Catholicism, is it does seem like that can happen to people. You know, like I was actually at I was at a Latin mass. Oh, where was I at? What city? Was it in Indianapolis? Beautiful mass, beautiful parish. And the pastor even spoke to that during his homily. He was like, some of you guys are coming up and asking me, like, if I need this or that or this or that to survive this tribulation. And I was really appreciative of what this pastor said. He said, if there was something that you guys needed to be saved to
Ooh, I lost you
me.
again, just for a brief moment there.
Oh, yeah. Something's trying to grab my mic here. Let me see. Am I back?
You're back.
Okay. I think it's Discord. Let me just close Discord. I've been getting pinged anyway. So, um, anyways, he was saying that if like I needed something more than I already have to keep you guys safe and God didn't tell me, I'd be mad at God, is what he said in his homily. And what he was speaking to is, you know, there's a lot of things circling on internet Catholicism of like, oh, you need this or that, or you're not going to make it through whatever trial or whatever. And it's like, I mean, like as a Catholic, like we have the sacraments is what we'd say. And if that ain't enough, if we need some other really niche thing and the revealed dogma and institution that we say is Jesus's church wasn't there and that wasn't enough, then like I don't know, that kind of distorts Catholicism's view of itself in a way. And I would say in some ways becomes like Gnosticism, you know, like secret revealed knowledge that you have to have from some arbiter of truth that's hidden, you know, to make it to the last emanation or whatever. So I don't know. That's kind of my gut reaction to that, I guess.
No, yeah, I think that the parallels between like the raddest of the trad kinds of Catholicism,
The raddest of the trad.
yeah, I'm trying to be very specific. I'm trying not to paint with too broad a brush here, but
Sure.
the parallels between Gnosticism and like the raddest of the rad trads, I think that's a pretty apt comparison.
A lot of Protestantism too, like
Really?
yeah, and to be fair, it's less like the mainline denominations, but and more like the Pastor Bob's Bible churches of like some guy that may or may not have had an accredited seminary education, and I don't know, not all of them are that way. Some of them are very smart, but the more end times focused, not independent Baptist type churches or non-denominational churches can get really focused on that same type of stuff and become almost Gnostic. Like if you don't have their particular formulation of justification by faith alone and view of the end times, then you're not going to be raptured, right?
Yeah.
And even the rapture itself, in certain Protestants, they believe in this idea of the rapture, which like the movement of Scripture is heaven coming to earth. Like that's what the whole book is about from Genesis to Revelation. But the rapture is the opposite of that. If this place is going to hell, we got to vacuum suck everybody out.
Where does the rapture even come from? It's not biblical, right?
It actually functions narratively like the Gnostic gospel, in a lot of ways. So that's not unique to the communities that you've experienced and you're talking about. That's like the Protestant side of this spectrum has that too. I think everyone has their crazies, right? Like every community has their crazies, you know. I think like sedevacantists are like the King James only
Yes.
people of the Catholic community, right? The King
Yes.
James only, like, well, if the King James is good enough for St. Paul, it's good enough for me. So yeah, I think everyone has their crazies, and as it would happen with human behavior, they're usually the loudest. So, but not the most numerous. So,
Well, I've got one more question for you, if that's all right.
sure.
So, and I've heard through the grapevine, and you'll have to confirm, deny for me. I've heard through the
Oh, boy.
grapevine that since your YouTube channel actually contains the word Catholic in the title, and there is a rule that says, well, not a rule, but there's like a guide that you should check with the bishop of your diocese if you're going to have Catholic in the title of like your organization. Like you should check with your bishop. And I've heard that you did indeed check with your bishop, and that your bishop said, "Yep, good to go." Okay, confirmed. Great.
Confirmed.
My final question for you then is, how much does the Vatican pay you?
Oh man, so much money.
I bet.
No,
Yeah.
just kidding. Someone's gonna clip that and just cut the context out of it too. Oh man, I do not get paid by the church in any capacity. So we do a lot for our local parish as well. Like they tried to pay us for stuff not related to the podcast at all, but it's like related to, like, we helped with the soundboard and stuff. And I'm like, nah, please don't. Like, I'm blessed with a business that provides for my family decently well, and it lets me buy this stuff, these lights, this camera. We use this for our business every day, and then I'm just a nerd, so I do this on the side. I will say, though, I reached the subscriber and view hour mark. My YouTube is monetized, so I make an average of like 10 cents to $5 a video, which is just epic and life-changing. Yeah. So yeah, no money from the Vatican. I pay them, actually.
Do you get Baron bucks?
Yeah. You know what? I would unironically take them. If Bishop Barron wanted to fund my apostolate, I wouldn't just be okay with that. I'd probably advertise it. So
that'd be really funny.
that question is so funny. Yeah. I would love if I could do this for a full-time job, just like talk about Catholic stuff on YouTube. If you guys hear crying, that's my daughter. She just woke up from her nap. My wife is with her. She's not just alone, just so no one thinks I'm a crazy dad. But yeah, she's got a good set of lungs on her, so you might be picking some of that up through the mic. Anyways, yeah, I mean, it would be cool, right? I think anyone who's a creator of any sort, whether it's in the Catholic world or not, if you could do this for a living, you totally would. My life is weird that, in a sense, I get to do this for a living for clients, like for other people, and then for fun for myself. So I am kind of always doing video stuff. And then when it's for clients, it's about something I'm bored with because it's their stuff, but I still like that I'm doing video stuff. And then when it's for me, it's like just all passion. So
that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, Drew, I told you I'd only keep you for an hour, and I've already kept you for 5 minutes longer than I said I would.
I'm so mad about it. Yeah. I'm just kidding.
Well, I said last question was, how much does the Vatican pay you? But my actual last question for you is, where can we find you? What do you got? Like, what's on deck for your channel? And then also, if you just wanted to kind of add any closing remarks before I let you go be with your daughter, who sounds like she's crying for her dad, then take it away.
She's probably crying for cocoa melon or apple juice. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, really appreciate you having me on, Kevin. I think conversations just between, I love your channel for this reason. Like, you have people that you disagree with on about many things, but you and I have had good dialogues, and I really value having you in our Catholic community. You add a good perspective to it, and you make me ask really good questions. So it's always a pleasure for me, I have found pleasure in stepping outside of my box and evaluating from other perspectives. And then at the very least, it's going to reinforce your own position in a stronger sense, or, allow you to see something greater. So I think it's really good that you do the work that you do. And it's valuable for me. It's made me think about things deeper. As far as what I'm up to, so yeah, Dom, who's in the chat, and I have started doing a show on Mondays called the Dom and Drew Show. And because I read them, but it means this, and so we're reading it. That's all we're doing. And that's on Mondays at like 5 Eastern time. I don't know. I'm Mountain time. It's 5:30 Eastern time. So we're doing that. I'm gonna go to Steubenville soon.
Oh, no way.
I don't know if anything's gonna happen there. We'll see. I might just be going and just like smoking cigars, and I'll make a vlog at the very least. So that might be coming up. And that's pretty much it. Just the stuff with Dom. You can find me over at Drew the Catholic on YouTube. I have an audio podcast, but I never update it, so you will have very little content if you go there. But that's about it.
Drew, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Right back at you in terms of loving the work that you do. And
Appreciate it.
let me say this about you and, of course, the rest of kind of Catholic YouTube. You guys keep me grounded. And I like to think that I serve the function of like a foil almost, like where the differences between us, we can kind of both, iron sharpens iron, right? Proverbs said it better than I do. So, but so just thank you for the kind words. And of course I feel the same way. Your work as well as the work of everybody else, keeps me grounded. And so keep doing what you're doing because I thoroughly enjoy it.
Good. Yeah. We'll both keep at it, and we'll have to talk more, man. I think there's more.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we will talk more. We talk occasionally over Discord, so we'll definitely continue that. And then, hey, I'd love to have you on the channel again sometime soon.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in. This has been Kevin Nonpracticing Catholic and Drew the Catholic. And until next time.